Good day. This is Small Biz David. And can you tell how excited I am today to be doing this HOA with one of my favorite Davids in the world? And it's one that we all know and love. Um, I'm very proud and honored to say that this is the fourth HOA that I've done with David. I'm going to take you back in time for a moment, David. Um, the very first HOA that I did with you was probably about almost 200 HOAs ago for me.
Oh
I've
wow!
come a long way since then.
Absolutely, you can say that again.
And then back in November, David was our featured entrepreneur during one of our 15 featured entrepreneurs during Global Entrepreneurship Week. And we saw another side of David, and that's precisely what I wanted to do. What makes David Amerland tick? What's he all about? Why does he do the things that he does today? Where does he get his Where do you get your provocative thinking, David? Where's that come from?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose I have a fairly unique position in that I sort of skim across the business world. I never go into, funnily enough, into the practicalities of everyday pressures they face, although I'm very aware of them. But by not getting involved in those, then I can see a much bigger picture. I can see a lot of the dynamics, and I can strip away a lot of the immediate pressures and actually take a step back. And that gives me a global view across business verticals, across different kind of businesses in terms and cultures and markets, and it also allows me to find the similarities and the pressure points where these things begin to look very similar, the Venn diagrams of each one, and that makes for a very interesting kind of situation. And then I apply that to myself, which is always a challenge.
Digressing for a moment, when was it in your life that you decided that there is an entrepreneur aspect? There is somebody that wants to be a business owner, and part of your business owning, obviously, a big part of your business owning is helping other folks with their businesses by helping them to ask and answer the right questions, and that's our topic for today. But when was it that you actually decided that of all the different things that you could have done with your life, that's what you wanted to do?
We have a small guest today with me.
Look, this is a famous animal. This is a famous one.
This is Mikey. Well, I suppose in many ways I've always, I've always sort of been in a position where I helped other people do more with what they did, and that was the same when I was working for a large corporation in the corporate world. My primary role was to help everybody within it communicate better, more efficiently, and get things moving. So I was in the business of removing obstacles, funnily enough. So what I do, I suppose, is the same job, but on a bigger stage, and perhaps with a little bit more freedom, which is nice. And it sort of happened organically, sort of things happen in life which you don't really plan for, and that was the same thing with me. I found myself having to decouple myself from a corporate environment simply because of personal circumstances.
Okay, and then back in April, you honored our community, this community, by with your book and the very first public announcement of Hangouts for Business. We did a book review, and it was a wonderful experience. And we set a community up. Actually, I have to put the community, I'll put it in the event stream so folks can join the community. And the mission of the community is very simple. A, read the book, buy the book and read the book. But more importantly than that, and David will tell you this, is to share with other businesses who are not using Google Plus technology how effective the technology can be for their businesses, particularly with Hangouts. Hangouts, I think, Dave, are the greatest thing that from a small business marketing perspective, the greatest thing ever created.
Well, I tend to agree. I think their impact is remarkable. I mean, case in point, what we're doing right now. I think that's amazing. You know, it feels like magic when we think about it. And it actually is a little bit like magic when you actually think of the technology behind it. If you think that, you know, I'm basically looking at a screen and so are you, but I'm seeing the person behind it and so are you. And the signals of our communication are being decoded and recoded and turned from electrical impulses into light pulses. They go across the Atlantic and then they go across the globe. I mean, it's magic, right? So yeah.
From Greece to Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yeah, well, yeah, this is it, isn't it? And from there, just about anywhere where there's a computer point for somebody to access the internet with. And I think it's amazing. Suddenly, we have very few obstacles to communicating, which then begs the question, if that's the case and communicating so easy, why do we do it so badly? And we really need to be better at it.
Okay, so let's get into today's discussion specifically. Something that very much excites me because you know I love questions. I think it was my mother who taught me to always ask questions, and what a great lesson for a parent to teach a child to find out what's going on. Why do you say that? Why does it work? What's happening? What's going on? And you posted about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I put a link to it in the event stream. An article that you had done, a blog that you had written, and within it were 10 questions, essential questions that business owners, and the organizations that they represent must ask themselves if they are going to be successful, if they are going to be around tomorrow, or by the end of the day, if they're going to be around by the end of the day sometimes. So if you would real quickly review the blog that you wrote, and then let's get right into some of the questions.
Well, the background of this is essentially that, before we start looking at the questions individually, is that essentially in order for any kind of business to move forward, it really needs to understand what it does in order for it to actually decide what isn't exactly working. And most businesses and most people, when they are in a business, have a false picture of this. The picture is created naturally false because we have expectations, we have self-delusion sometimes, we don't have enough data or enough information, or we have data and information which is out of date. So being able to actually look at ourselves at some depth and answer honestly about what it is we do, how we do things, how we deal with very specific things, then becomes part of the diagnostic we should be using in order to become better. And you'd be surprised how many people actually resist that, and how many businesses resist that, simply because it does mean you come out of your comfort zone. You start doing things which perhaps are not as easy to deal with. But that's how you grow.
Excuse me for asking this question. I should know the answer, but who originally published that article? Remember?
Sorry?
I said, do you remember who originally published it?
I wrote that article on my blog originally.
That was your own blog?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was intended to sort of get the ball rolling on exactly that kind of approach. And as it happened, because of Google Plus and the approach which we take to these things, it took off quite nicely.
With all the followers that you have, were there any companies that you met because they read the blog and said, David, come and ask these questions of our organization? Were there any of those folks along the way?
Well, yes, and they always start with, you're not going to ask us those questions, are you? Which is funny, really, because yeah, that's exactly what I do. I mean, I make them basically look at themselves through the prism of those 10 questions.
And I'm sure people probably know about this, but a good part of the business that you have is asking large multinational companies these questions that even the smallest of small business owners should be asking themselves. And therein lies the beauty of the whole thing. You ask those questions to, like I said, the large multinationals. I've asked these same questions to hundreds of small businesses, and that's.
But that's right, and I think this is something which is perhaps worth stressing sometimes, because we tend to think that a large business with a lot of staff and large marketing budgets is fundamentally different from a small one, and really it isn't. I mean, certainly scale introduces certain dynamics, which some of which are beneficial and some of which are not. But overall, the challenges which a business faces are the same. And these days, the customer-facing interface is exactly the same, because irrespective of what kind of business you're in, you're facing pretty much the same customer profile in terms of the modern customer is very well informed, he's connected, he's very mobile, and he is very voluble in terms of his communication. And that is the same across the world right now, which is why it's a challenge, a very similar challenge for a large business as it is for a small one, on what they have to do now in order to actually progress.
And the strange dynamic of all that is that the smaller the business, in terms of number of employees, the easier it is to make change. And therein lies a major advantage for a small business. There's not layers of bureaucracy. You and I want to make a change to our businesses, we can do it in the next 90 seconds, and we move forward.
Agility is an incredible advantage, and I think in today's world, the ability to move quickly and respond very fast is the kind of competitive advantage that many large multinationals would give their eye teeth for. I have also to say that there's always an inherent risk. Because we work in small businesses as individuals, we tend to move sometimes so quickly that we forget that there should also be a methodology behind what we do. So you can't do things on a whim just because you can. That's because you're an individual, and today you want to blow cold and tomorrow you're going to blow hot. Well, yes, but there still has to be a logic behind it. There has to be some kind of methodology which creates a culture of approach. And that's, again, this is the Achilles heel for many small businesses, which they need to take on board.
I lost my thought of. I had one last question I wanted to ask before we get into these, but well, it'll come along. Okay. Well, you told me very briefly that these 10 questions that you published, they were done in a logical order. You're kind of asking the easy questions, the one that didn't take a whole lot of thought, then they got progressively harder until number 10. Oh my goodness, I don't know the answer to that question. David, why don't you come into our organization and provide the answer to that question for us? You love that one, don't you?
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, the last question is, how do you deal with failure in your organization, right? So essentially, I mean, there are a lot of problems there. I mean, a lot of the times there's a lot of denial in terms of the very word failure, because we feel it's catastrophic. But actually, failure is as much a part of business and learning as anything else. It's like looking at life and never having to consider death. Well, that'd be great if we were immortals, in which case we'd probably never even consider failure, because, you just go from one trial to another forever until you get it right. But the fact that there is death in life allows you to make very careful value judgment calls, because the stakes are high. And the same thing for business. Failure is part of the learning process. We should see it for what it is. We should certainly quantify our actions and help us make better decisions, but we shouldn't be afraid of embracing it as something catastrophic, because it never is, unless it has completely destroyed us, in which case it really doesn't matter. So we should always platform for learning, and the way we approach it mentally a lot of the times is critical. It's basically, it can make for an organization the difference between being there for the next 10 years or not. So it is that important.
Well, I'm very proud to say, David, that I wrote this book 7 years ago. How do you answer these 749 questions about your small business? Actually using the word small business. And I created it as a workbook. so that the small business owner could take notes, say, geez, never thought about that for my business. I need to think about it, take some notes, need to call my accountant, need to call David Amerland, need to call business strategist, whatever. And the key words that you have used, and I'm a keyword guy, the key words in your questions, I covered most of them except one. And
Okay.
I want to delve into that one that I didn't even think about, but it's a really a David Amerland type question. So it was question number 4. Where is the line drawn in your idealism? I never used the word idealism.
Okay, that's an important question, really, because every business really needs some kind of ideal, and which is expressed through morality and ethics, and it's what the business does. But ultimately, you need to think that a business is there to do something very specific, whether it's to sell a product or sell a service. It is there to make a profit and help everybody within it basically make a living. And that is the ultimate reason that a business actually exists. So you need to be able to balance that, because if you let it be unbalanced, then ultimately it becomes a very self-destructive or a very destructive force in the world, and we have seen examples of it in the commercial world time and again. So you really need to have a very firm grasp of where you're going and how you do things in terms of the kind of morality and ethics that you apply. And if you don't have that, there's a very slippery slope you can actually get on, where you incrementally justify choices and actions which in themselves may not be catastrophic, but they may lead to something really bad. And that's why you need to have a very good awareness of that kind of approach and that kind of attitude in yourself.
Now, the next question I would like to ask is something that I am probably a lone ranger on the key word in this question, and I'm very anxious to hear your response to this question. Maybe you and I can get involved in a little debate here. I don't know.
Okay, let's give it a shot.
It was question number 6. What happens when a competitor goes after you with all guns blazing?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because essentially that also shows, and it's tied to number 4, isn't it? It's tied essentially to your morality and your ethics. What do you do? Does the end justify the means? Do you need to simply remove and eradicate and erase, go thermonuclear, to quote Jobs, on the competition? Or do you try to understand what's happening, find a dynamic, and find a solution which will allow both of you to survive? I think for a large part of the 20th century, we were entrenched in a mentality, in a war siege mentality when it came to business. We were out there to basically kill the competition. I used to hear it in boardroom after boardroom, time and again. Salespeople were called troops. The floor, they were fighting in the trenches. I used to hear that expression all the time. And when you use that kind of analogy, it tends to create a kind of mentality which leads down the path where, again, the end justifies the means. And I think that's very wrong. So essentially, having a very clear idea of how you deal with competitors, what lengths you go into to address competition and still work with the people who are in the business place, such as you, because they're also people. They also are trying to earn a living. And ultimately, the marketplace is large enough for all of us to survive. So having that kind of thinking behind what you do really allows your business to grow under pressure and differentiate itself from pretty much anything that your competitors do. Now, if you don't have that clear idea in your head, then basically you're responding to what your competitors do, which means you have no control over your business. You're being controlled, and eventually you're going to lose out.
I always like to say, and here's where, I mean, you are absolutely spot on with what you were saying, but I and this is the way that I've lived my life, that I have always thought my greatest competitor is myself, and I try not to spend too much time giving credibility to somebody who might be perceived as a competitor. As a matter of fact, there was one period of my life, a 10-year period of my life, where I was talking with very, very large companies, and there was and the companies weren't necessarily competitive, but the vendors to that industry were very, very competitive. And I would never, ever talk about the competition unless I was pushed into a corner and I had to. I just didn't want to do it. Now, the person who's buying the services has the advantage of saying, well, I want an answer to that question, or I'm going to do business with your competitor. I'm not going to do business with you. I mean, they certainly have that advantage. But this whole notion of competition, if we spend too much time thinking about it, we start to lose focus on what it is that we do best.
Absolutely. I think you're addressing two very different but very important things here. The first one is focus. You absolutely need to have it, and it needs to be on yourself. You need to have a very clear idea of what you are doing and why. And if you don't know that, then anything else which you put in place is going to fail. Now, the other thing is that you quite rightly said that, in your life, as you're working through, you would not, you would go to any length not to really address the competition or even mention them. And that was very much the strategy that was in place for pretty much all of the 20th century. And I think we're coming to a new age now where, how can you not mention your competitors? It's like you're pretending they don't exist when you know that they exist and your customers know that they exist. So if you pretend that they don't exist, then you get into another type of fantasy where you pretend that you
denial.
Yeah, exactly. Your customers are only talking to you, and they're not. They're talking to your competitors as well, or your competitors are talking to them. So essentially, if you can't say, hey, we're in business and we do this, and they're in business and they do that, and we do this way, and this is exactly why you should be in business with us. And if you don't like this, then it's a free world. You can go somewhere else and do business with. Now, if you can't be that real, then problems begin to sort of incrementally build up. And I know it's a challenge, and it's a huge one. It's not something which can happen overnight or can even happen lightly. But it is the new way that we're actually moving forward.
Let me share with you an event that just came to mind. It happened in my life, and how did I do the right thing? And I'd like to get your perspective on it. So I was talking to a very, very large company, and I was providing a service solution for them. And I'm in a room with, well, I don't know if I was at that time. There's a bunch of vice presidents in the room, and I'm doing a presentation, and they said, well, this is how we want it. This is the problem, and this is how we want to do it. And can you do it? And I studied it for a while and asked them a few questions, and I said, I cannot get involved with that solution because I think it's a setup for failure, and I will not get involved with something that I think is potentially could fail. If I'm feeling that on the front side of it, it's not a good thing at all. So this vice president of this big company, he says, well, if you don't do it this way, not only will I tell every vice president in this company not to do business with your company, I'm going to let the competition know that. I said, well, you know what? I have no control over that. If that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. Okay, did I take a good approach in terms of the competition and what I saw my value was as a service provider?
Well, yeah, I think you sort of pretty much answered question number 4, where do you draw the line in your idealism? And I think having the ability to make that kind of stand requires a very good grasp of your own strengths and weaknesses and character. And you can apply this personally to a small business setting, or you can apply it globally to a much larger business, which also has to have values and character. So being able to do that, I think, is a good thing.
Great story, great headline story this morning about competitors. And I don't think there's a more competitive industry than cell phones, mobile phones. I think that's probably as competitive as you can probably be. Sprint has been talking with T-Mobile, since January about merging the two companies. I don't know that it's been public information since January, but that's what I read this morning. And I think Sprint and T-Mobile are number 3 and number 4. I think that's what, pretty close to those numbers. Anyway, the deal fell apart yesterday. It was like a huge $80 billion deal. I don't know what it was. Big deal. Fell apart. And now the CEO of T-Mobile is out bad-mouthing Sprint and saying, here, I was privy to information about a company, and if you choose to do business with them, you're nuts. That was an amazing kind of story, and I guess that's kind of the danger that happens when companies merge. But the other side of it, and I like your comment on this, aren't you seeing more competitors talking with each other today? I think you said it a little earlier than ever before.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly we see this across the board. We see it in commercial environments where potential competitors are actually working together in some areas. We see it in technical environments where, seemingly competing companies like Google and Bing, which are direct competitors, are working together on other fronts to actually create common standards and common interfaces and a common environment. We need to remember that ultimately the marketplace is decided by what you do and how you do it and the number of customers that are in place. Too few customers, it doesn't matter what kind of business you have. It's going to fail because there are not enough people to sustain it, or enough customers to sustain it. If what you're doing is not good enough, again, it doesn't matter how many customers you have, because eventually, if the bad quality catches up with you, and problems begin to amount. So really, you need to strike the balance right, and which means that essentially the marketplace is always big enough for people to come in. They always do things a little bit differently, and people working in similar areas as you are working as hard as you to create and broaden the market. They're creating more customers. They're raising awareness of the need of a service or a product, just as you do. And then your job is a little bit easier in that front, and it just becomes a case of saying, hey, we do things this way. If this appeals with you, great.
Okay, let's do, in an attempt to say something about all 10 questions, and there's a conspicuous absence of a keyword that we'll wait till the end to talk about. Maybe you'll hit it in one of your answers. Let's just go down the line and give some quick answers. Well, you can take as much time as you want. Number 1, what drives your business forward? That was your number 1 question.
Yes, I mean that's seemingly an easy one, because really you need to address your own motivation. What is it that makes your business go? What is it that makes you passionate about things? What makes you? So depending on the approach you take, this question can become relatively easy to answer, or it can become really, really hard. If you start talking about really deep psychological motivations and what gets you out of bed in the morning, then it becomes extremely difficult. But most businesses are there to make money, they're there to sell something, and in order to do that, they have either a unique approach or a unique product or a unique service or a combination of all these things. And being able to define them very clearly is part of the what I call the winning equation, basically.
Might I be so bold to ask the question, what drives your business, David Amerland, forward?
Well, I'm passionate about creating a clearer communication level across the world in pretty much anything, and that includes search and includes businesses. And I get a real thrill out of seeing things connect, because it means that while I'm doing what I do and earning a living and helping other people do what they do, and so they can earn their living, we're actually contributing to change across the world. And that change is positive, and it's incremental. And that is really what drives me. Otherwise, I'd be doing things differently, perhaps on a smaller scale, and having a lot less stress maybe, and earning about the same money.
Isn't it? It's a wonderful feeling to be able to drive change. It's a wonderful feeling.
Yes. I think it's part of all of us as part of the responsibility. And the thing is, we are responsible and we're not really accountable, which is a funny thing, because nobody expects us to do that. This is not what we're, nobody charges us with change. Nobody says, hey, you need to wake up today and do something positive in the world that will help things move forward. Nobody says that. And nobody's ever going to judge you on that, except yourself. And that's something which we take on as a sense of responsibility. And I think ultimately a lot of the problems we have sometimes is that we feel that responsibility and we couldn't really see a way of doing it. And it created a lot of conflicts in ourselves, which led to bad decisions and bad behaviors and all sorts of things happening. And for the first time, perhaps in history, we are in a position to actually achieve things in a slightly different, slightly better way. And we just got to do it and hope for the best.
I was involved in a trailer yesterday on a discussion I'm going to be involved in next week on change. And I made the statement in that trailer that, once again, it's easier for a small business to make a change. Well, change is a difficult thing for anybody. When you have to change a behavior, there's a whole dynamic that goes about that change in your behavior. But for a small business, we already talked about it, it's way easier for a small business to make a change than a large business.
Absolutely, I agree with that. But ultimately, change is something which everybody does. You simply cannot remain static. If you do, all you're doing is a countdown to the time when your business will no longer be viable. So it's something which everybody needs to embrace.
Okay, number 2. Logical question. Who makes the decisions?
Yes, and again, this is one of those things one of those questions which is sometimes very easy to answer superficially, and sometimes it isn't. I mean, if we talk about a small business, for instance, you can say, well, you say I'm the owner, I'll do it, but maybe your wife does for you, or your husband, depending on who owns the business. So it's not really that easy to answer that. If you're in a larger corporation, well, you need to think: is it a dictatorship? Do I sort of command and people obey, and if they don't, I fire them? Or is it a bit more consensual? Or is it totally consensual? Or is it run by committee? I mean, these things basically become part of the identity of the business, and that infuses the business with character, which then decides how fast it moves and how different it is and how good it's going to be, which has an impact on its morals and ethics and where it draws the line. So again, it's one of those questions which is seemingly easy to answer, but it may not be.
A little quick story. My 3rd year in business, I had my mother as a business partner, and I said to my mother, Mom, I want to be your son. I don't want to be your business partner for the reasons you just said. I want to make the decisions. I didn't want to have my mother, who I love my mother dearly, but she wasn't involved in the in the day-to-day activity of the business. She wasn't out on the street. So my grandfather overheard that statement. Her father, my grandfather, and he said, David, if you want to make the decisions in the business, you give your mother $10,000. He said this to me: you give your mother $10,000, and you can go ahead and make all the decisions you want. And I said, Papa, you're the boss. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make the decision. It cost me $10,000 to make the decision.
Well, there you go. See, there's always a cost involved. That's for sure.
But it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, David. Greatest thing. Okay, how do you make sure that? Oh, here's a great one. How do you make sure that everyone does what they should?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, this goes to the very core of many businesses. I mean, some of them have incredibly complex rules and regulations and systems of reporting, and some don't. They have a complete culture of trust. And that is really, really hard to achieve. If you do it, you're absolutely brilliant, because you can make a large business respond and function almost like a little one. You have agility and you have the ability to actually move very quickly. If you don't have trust in your organization, then you have a lot of problems, and you need then to operate in a different way.
Back to that concept of trust. About 5 years ago, I was reading a lot of stories that a lot of large corporations were they were telling their business units, they might have 10 or 12 or whatever business units within their company, they were telling those folks, we want you to act in an entrepreneurial fashion. We want each of those business units. And I haven't heard that discussion for a while, and you probably have or haven't. Certainly have a comment about it. What's going on with that?
Well, everybody wants their businesses to work organically, very fast, be very agile, be very innovative, be very inventive, be very creative. And I've actually been in. I was once at a meeting where executives were given an hour in a room to go and be creative. I thought it was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. But definitely there's a need for those things, and those elements of innovation and creativity and agility and passion in a business, they don't just happen. They are part and parcel of the environment, and they're also a product of the people who operate in that environment. And you can't divorce those two elements. The environment and culture, which is part of your business, is also reflective of the people you have in your business. And if you don't manage to make those two elements work, then your business won't eventually work. It's as simple as that.
Okay, here's a great one. In light of today's world and internet and Google Plus and Hangouts on air, this is a great question because a lot of folks have to potentially deal with this. What happens when what you do causes some kind of damage along the way? What do you do?
Okay, this is a critical question for every business, because there's no business that can operate in a damage-free way in the world. There's always some kind of negative impact. It can be impact as simple as a carbon footprint and resources being used up, or it can be as difficult as perhaps environmental pollution, or some kind of pollution which happens as a result of that. Or it can be even worse, where they're actually taking some resources out of the community and putting them somewhere else because that's their way of operating. The thing is that every business is embedded in a community, whether the community is very local or it's wider in a sense and it's a little bit more global. That's immaterial. They're still embedded in that community. They're still part of that. And if we step back and look at the broader picture, there's still a business operating on this planet, and this is the only planet we have, populated by people and who live in the same planet and breathe the same air as we do. So really, you need to be able to have I was going to say a contingency plan, but really there's no such thing as a contingency plan in this kind of situation. You really need to have a way of addressing the balance. You need to have a very clear idea of how your business operates, what impact it has in its community and in its world and in its customer base, both positive and negative. And then you need to work to find ways to address that balance, and even more importantly, you need to be seen to be addressing that balance. And these are again important roles that businesses should play, and that's immaterial, the size of your business.
Okay, number 6 we talked about. Number 7, how do you keep your employees happy in addition to making sure they get their paycheck when they're supposed to get their paycheck?
Well, the traditional view here is, you employ somebody and you pay them, and that should keep them happy, right? And we know this is so wrong and so much part of the problem that happens, because work should challenge you, it should fulfill you, it should allow you to basically become a better person or a more creative person. And I'm using creative here in a sort of more general sense and just in the strictly artistic sense of the word. But essentially, the work which you do should not be something which is grafted onto you for a few hours each day so you can earn a living. And if that's the way you approach it because the business allows you to, or even makes you approach it that way, it's definitely the wrong business to be in. You shouldn't be working in it, and it's definitely the wrong way to move forward. So again, irrespective of whether the business is 3 people or 30,000 people, if they don't all get fired up just by being there, if they can't find ways to activate their passion and activate their imagination and really feel they're doing something worthwhile, then the hours that they're spending there are wasted hours, which is a sad thing.
And that is probably a kind of a segue into question number 8. Where do all your new ideas come from?
Well, yeah, because every business, again, needs to be innovative. They know that they need to evolve, and if they don't evolve, they won't really adapt. They won't be aware of the changes happening in the marketplace, and at some point, they're going to be redundant and they're going to crash and burn. So the traditional solution to this is that businesses use consultants. They said, we get an agency, they're going to come in and tell us what to do next. And if that's what you hope today, business is really complex today, and the world has become a lot more complicated because everything is interconnected. So So if you're hoping that an outsider is going to come in and tell you what to do with your business, well, you're wasting your money and you're living in a very delusional kind of world. That has to come from you. And the best thing that an outsider can come and do is perhaps show you how to find the solution in yourself or show you how to better implement it, but they certainly are not going to come in and give it to you. So that has to come from you always.
Personal question directed to you. In the consulting work that you do, is most of your work where David Amerland goes in himself as the consultant, or David Amerland is brought in on somebody else's team as the consultant?
It's 50-50. I mean, sometimes I'm brought in as part of a team because they need my particular expertise with semantic search and social media and social media management, and I sort of fit in with a team which do a lot of other things. And sometimes I come in just as me, and they say, we need help with a specific thing, which then usually these kind of projects tend to grow in scope as they evolve, because we uncover more and more problems which need more and more attention. So it always depends on what the business thinks it needs and how big the project is initially.
Okay. Did we talk about change? How do you deal with the need for change in your organization?
No, we didn't. And that's an important one, yeah.
We've said the word change, but we might not have dealt with it. How do you deal with change in your organization?
Well, yeah, because once you realize that you need to change, then what do you do next? I mean, large organizations usually begin to apply a kind of methodology. They start a dialogue going, and they begin to assess how people think about change and what they can do to help them get there. And small ones usually tend to dictate things. They say, tomorrow we're going to change. We're going to do this. And that kind of implementation, I mean, both kinds of implementation have inherent risks. In a large organization, the change itself may get lost in methodologies, and you may get anything but change, although everybody pays lip service to it. In a small organization, perhaps people will feel the need for change and realize what they need to do and have no reasonable way of actually getting there, because there's always a transition. You can't sort of go from black to white. There are always different stages of gray where you got to go in between. And both of these issues, or both of these problems, indicate that change is always very difficult. It is always dependent, again, upon the culture you have in your business and upon the people you have in your business. So you need to be able to manage both in order to have a successful transition.
Okay, well, we're coming. We've covered all the questions. Actually, the key word that I was looking for, and you didn't use the word, but you were getting close to using it, and that's profit. It's amazing that somehow that isn't brought in. What would your question about profit be, and what would your answer be to that question?
Well, every business is there to actually make a profit. That's what it does. I mean, the very definition of business is that it's there to sell a service or a product or a combination of those two and make money from it. And in that, it allows other people, the people working in the business, to actually make a living and have a life, which are important outcomes. So, we take it as a given that a business will do that. We also take it as a given, but we don't want the business to really fail catastrophically, because the moment it does that, then it stops making a profit, which means that the people inside it stop making a living, and that is not good for anybody. So really, the question isn't really, do you want to have more of a profit, do you want to have less of a profit, because that's immaterial. Business itself always wants to make a profit. But the real question behind all this is, how do you achieve that kind of balance? So the business constantly moves forward, constantly maintains or incrementally increases its profitability, but at the same time it manages so in a balanced way without burning the world around it down and without burning up the people inside it. And we've got to think of business as a machine, really. A successful business is like a sausage factory. It takes meat which is not perhaps a great quality, and it takes it through, and you get sausages at the other end which are sold at a high profit, because they're deemed to be a delectable product. So we need to think that a business works like that in principle, but the people, it shouldn't be consuming the people in it, and it shouldn't be hurting its customers. So striking these balances sometimes is not so easy, and that's the challenge for most businesses today.
I am sure that David Amerland can get an audience with virtually any CEO in this world. I believe you. I really believe you could do that, David.
Probably
But,
not every CEO, but I do have, at least these days, I do have the ear of quite a few, which is quite good.
no, but the question I'm asking, these 10 questions, would they be ones that you would typically ask a CEO one-to-one, or would they be a question with a CEO and his closest friends inside of that business?
Depending on the setting, I would apply it equally to either a group or a single individual. And the reason for that is that the dynamic is always the same, but the depth changes. So if you apply it to one person, then you're stripping back a lot more layers, you're going a lot deeper, it becomes a lot more introspective. If you apply it to an organization, depending on the organization level at which you apply it at, it can become relatively superficial, but fairly broad, and certainly broad enough for the answers to have some kind of substance behind them.
Well, and also too, it boils down to how was that employee empowered within the company? Do they have the power to make a decision, or do they have the power just to get all the data together and somebody else is going to make the decision?
Yeah, I mean it's quite funny sometimes, but any kind of business, rather any single employee these days tends to be a microcosm of the business they work in. So if you ask the right questions, just by the answers you get back, you can pretty much tell whether the business is a fairly balanced one, it is very committed to its employees, it is equitable or not, which is quite fascinating.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David, for taking time out of. There can't be many folks that have a busier schedule than you do, or no, I shouldn't say a busier schedule, more demand on your time than you. Great demands, and the one question that wasn't on this list that I'd like to ask is a personal question. Rumor has it that you are working on a book. Is there any truth to that rumor?
Oh, well, yeah, actually there is. Yes, the rumor has it right. I'm actually working on the next book in the series of Google Plus books I've been working on recently. Google Semantic Search was a broad up sort of stage-setting book. I did the Google Plus Hangouts for Business, which picked up from there. And there's a follow-up book, which has both a very localized impact and a very broad one in terms of how the dynamics are applied. And I will be, as I'm getting further and deeper into the research, I'm about halfway through the writing process. I'm going to start putting some snippets out in the stream, so be on the lookout for them.
Well, you know that I'm going to be on the lookout for them. Just don't bury them in your brilliant Sunday read. Please don't put them inside there.
No, Sunday read is pure pleasure there. So I'll just sort of explore things on a freer basis. So I won't.
That's a blog that has incredible readership, and it's a lot of fun for me because I have very irregular hours, and so I'm usually sitting at my computer at 3 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and as I'm reading your Sunday read, people are just starting to get into it, and the comments are just starting to flow. There's usually about 30 to 50 comments before I start reading it, but it's a wonderful thing. Wow, everybody loves to get a coffee and 10 donuts. Did you say 10 donuts? Or
at the very least, you need at least 10. But I think it's fantastic because it's what you said. Doesn't it feel like a very communal feeling? I mean, I put a lot of effort into the writing itself because it fascinates me and it really engages me. But when I go back and read everything, where I find the greatest value are in the comments, which everybody has put in there, because they're very insightful. They have a lot of depth. A lot of them are incredibly nuanced in the way they present things, and it is absolutely fascinating and extremely humbling, I must say, because it's brilliant. In themselves, they make the read almost immaterial.
Well, once again, it goes back to that, what a wonderful feeling is to create change and to be able to create change. Well, there are lots and lots and lots of folks that wait for your Sunday read. I mean, and they want to see what's on David's mind, and they get into it, and it's a great way to start a week, or I guess it's starting a week rather than ending a week.
It is, yeah, I suppose it is. Well, we started in the right way, though.
Right. Well, David, thank you very much for your time, and you're forcing me to do something that I have never done before with one of my HOAs, and I'm going to go through the exercise. There was so much great material, information from you in this. I am going to timestamp this HOA. I've never done that before. It's a manual process. It takes a long time. I've actually challenged a few friends to come up with an application that will timestamp an HOA. They'd make $1 zillion on it. What a great, what a great application that would be.
It would be. I'd be very grateful if you did that, and thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. I think it helps sometimes to articulate these things, and it certainly helps me, and I'm really grateful for it.
It's certainly my pleasure, and thank you for your time. And I want to thank anybody who took time out of their day, either watching this HOA live, or we'll go into the event stream, which I know you will. I know you will, because I try to market the event stream, use it as a real, true landing page, and it can continue to have value for a long time. And as I said, as I timestamp this, well, we know that there's 10 questions that were answered, so we'll create that. But a lot of great information, and thank you for your time. And I look forward to seeing you the next time, which may very well be the best time.